Chapter 5. Burgos looked a little like some slightly poor town off the coast of Spain. With its narrow streets and mixed colors of roofs and buildings, it was very Mediterranean. We had stuffed the boat into a small dock just south of town before sunrise and just walked into the country. I was still in my $5,000 suit, and she was in yet another stunning red dress. We stopped in a small store and bought a bag full of groceries. A large loaf of bread stuck out of the top of the brown bag. She had said, "Who would stop us and ask us for passports? We had just been shopping for food." Like no illegal immigrant would ever do that. It was insane, but it seemed to work. As we got closer to town, she hailed a cab and it took us to what she had called the Safe House, which was a one-floor walk-up apartment above a sushi place that looked like they were serving whale steaks and alien octopus. I would not eat there, at least not after the last meal we had back in Istanbul. That shit had quite possibly wrecked me for bad food forever. We climbed the stained concrete steps to the old wooden door. Tara reached up on the right side of the door frame and produced a key, like she had just been there a few minutes ago, and we went inside in a hot minute. The place was small, cramped, and a shithole that smelled like a crotch pit. She led me through the micro living room / dining room kitchen area to a shabby curtain that separated the area from an even smaller bedroom with a twin bed and just enough room to slide sideways around it to a closet door. "What the hell are we doing? I don't need to see the closet. I'm sure it's just as fucked up as the rest of this condom," I quipped as she pulled the closet door open. Inside was dark, but it seemed bigger than I would have guessed. Tara turned to me and said, "Follow me in here," with an odd tone like she was talking to a camera in a bad movie. And then she disappeared into the darkness. I followed her, and a second later, a light blinded me as we walked through another door into what could have been another dimension. This was the real apartment, and it was like an Eastern European designer imposter version of a New York apartment, or what they thought a posh suite in New York hotel would be like. Better put, it was clearly decorated by Trump's decorator, complete with gold wallpaper, black and gold tables, deep red carpets, and a collection of furniture that was at least 20 grand on sale. In the far corner of the huge living room was a Victorian-style floor-to-ceiling cabinet that Tara made her way to. She opened the door to reveal a rather high-tech computer system with a floating 32-inch flat-screen monitor. She hit a few keys and the system lit up. She looked at me again. "Wait till you see this," she said, as she pressed another button, and then from behind a fake kabuki room divider screen, lights came on. She walked over to it and pulled the white screen back to expose an elevator door opening to a small but modern lift. "Come on," she said as she got in. "Let's get that memory of yours shook loose." I got in and the doors closed, and the thing dropped like a rock for what seemed like a good 5 minutes. "How fucking deep is this?" I asked. "It's deep," was all she offered. At last the thing stopped and the doors started to open. I was filled with mixed thoughts. I was flipping back and forth between a Dexter's Lab-looking place with a bunch of techno-colored computer equipment and a few round chairs, and the basement of a pawn shop from Men in Black where they took Kay to have his memory returned to him, and a black market equipment with a track that rolled a bowling ball round and round. The door opened to neither. It was just a small room again, one with no doors. We got out. Tara walked over to a blank place on the wall and waved her hand in the air, and a small square in the wall slid open, and sitting on a plastic hanger of sorts was what looked like a tens unit, which would be quite a disappointment after all this shit. This big lead into this subterranean layer of clandestine organization, all this cloak and dagger nonsense for a cheap-ass battery-powered made-in-India tens unit? I was expecting some next-level shit here, or at the bare minimum, some real Buck Rogers in the 25th century gadget. Tara walked over and grabbed it up, and was placing it on my head. Is this a tens unit? 'Cause that's what it looks like," I said. No. It's a neurostimulator designed to remove your memory block," she said, taking a step back while she was holding the remote, which was attached to the unit, just like every tens unit I had ever seen. She went to push the button. "Wait, stop!" I yelled at her, causing her to jump back a little. "Look, if this thing is going to shock me on my fucking head," I said. She shook her head. "I said it was not a tens unit. Relax." She went to push the button again. I grabbed her hand. Okay, look. It's okay to just be honest with me. Is this going to hurt in any way? I knew I sounded like a baby, but I didn't care. It had been a long few days, and no one could blame a guy for being a little fucking fried by all of this. Tara laughed. Stop it, silly. Why would I hurt you or lie to you? And before I could answer, she pushed the button. And I felt what seemed like a couple thousand volts bouncing around inside my head, like it was trying to break out the other side of my fucking head. And then I pissed myself and fell on the floor in a heap, whimpering and sobbing. I felt some drool dripping from the corner of my mouth. I could not even talk. I just mumbled the words, "fucking bitch," to which Tara laughed again. I told you it wasn't a TENS unit, it's way more like electric shock therapy. Although I've never seen anyone piss themselves after it. Anyhow, how do you feel? How did I feel? That was the real question, wasn't it? I mean, how would anyone feel? Well, I said at last when my control over my lips returned. Let's see. My brain feels deep fried. I can't feel my hands or legs. I'm drooling uncontrollably. My balls feel 3 sizes smaller and I fucking hate you. Well, I'd say you're in touch with your feelings, she said in a joking manner, but this was not time to joke with me. I was done. When she turned to replace the Marquis de Sade memory booster in the hole in the wall, I rolled over on the floor and into the elevator and pushed the button. The doors closed as she turned back towards me. "Oh shit," was all I could hear her say as the doors closed, leaving her there in the pit. A few minutes later, the doors opened in the apartment. I blocked the doors from closing again so she could not call the elevator back down, and I ran through the place into the closet passage, and then a few steps through the shithole later, I was falling down the staircase onto the streets. I made a hard left out of the building and ran as fast as my broken and beaten body could take me. 2, 4, 10 blocks later, I saw a police car. I ran over to it, slamming my hand on the hood as the 2 men inside jumped. They got out. Clearly, they could see I was in trouble. "Help me. I've been kidnapped by an insane woman that killed a cashier and stole a boat, and fuck it. I'm in this country without a passport or good sense. I'm a bad person. I just want to go home or to jail or whatever. I need the American embassy now. She shrunk my balls. She shrunk my balls." I was babbling. They looked as scared as I felt. I had never been this close to madness in my life, and while I did feel like I could punch through a brick wall, I was totally unhinged. They grabbed me up and shoved me into the back seat of the car and were traveling at a good pace. I was still yelling about my balls and plane crashes as the car came to a screeching halt in front of a large brick building that looked really important. They pulled me out of the car. "I'm sorry," was all I could say, over and over as they held me up and walked me into the building. And that was when I saw the tempered glass windows and the woman behind them in a white nurse's uniform. It was not hard to figure out. They had brought me to the local asylum. This would never do. I found my feet and stood up quickly, taking them by surprise. I grabbed one of them by the belt and took the gun from him. The rest was like I was watching someone else do it. I saw my right hand cross over the one cop's head with the gun, and then a foot kicked the second one, a roundhouse kick. And then it was like I was being carried out the door, shoved into the car, only this time I was in the driver's seat. The car was moving now, and that was when I saw him in the rearview mirror, or rather, I saw me. And he winked at me. "You're doing good, buddy. Hang a right here." And I did it without thinking. "What the fuck is going on?" I said out loud. He laughed a little. "I'm just giving you a little help," he said from the back seat. Or at least I thought it was the back seat. It might have been the back of my head. I wanted to fight it, the urge to talk to him, but I had just assaulted 2 cops with their own weapons in a foreign country and stole a police car. I was edging closer to Liam Neeson territory here, and unless I really was who Tara and this phantom said I was, I did not have any number or particular skills that were a nightmare for anyone, anywhere. In fact, there never has been anyone that would have used their only call to ask me to save them. The general feeling was, if you were in trouble and happened to get me on the phone, just say goodbye, because you were fucked. However, now, I was not sure. And not just of that, but of anything. After all, there was no one in the back seat. No one had helped me back there. And I just had my mind zapped with 1.21 gigawatts. And now I was taking out cops, stealing cars, and seemingly navigating my way to the dock where the boat was without even needing a map or GPS or even thinking about it. Other than the fact that I was clearly having a breakdown, I was functioning at a never-before-seen level. It was enough of what you might call prima facie evidence that I was, indeed, a secret agent. There was just one thing I had not thought of. I had pissed in these very pants, and that would never do. When I arrived at the dock, I made my way to the boat, and I got it started. I went below to find a full closet of clothes. Fashish had good taste, and we were about the same size. I stripped off my pee-pee pants and put on some big boy pants. I was going to head towards any country I thought was semi-familiar and friendly towards the USA. My first thought was Italy. Now that would mean risking a quick trip back through the Straits, but then I would be home free. I made sure that the right side of the boat was facing the shore and pushed the throttle full. I had escaped terror and the rest of the insanity, and while I was sure I would need years of psychoanalysis and maybe some very strong psychotropic drugs, I was going home. Chapter 6. It had been 7 hours since I left, and the run through the Straits was a bit scary, but uneventful. I had the boat on empty now, running on fumes as a small port on the island of Marmara was in sight. I knew I could get some fuel there without any problem since it was part of Turkey, and the boat had a Turkish registration. It was nightfall as I pulled into the port, but there was no one in sight. I would have to do some work to get fueled up. I found a small dock for fishing boats, and I pulled the boat into the fuel slip. I located a screwdriver and a hammer in the toolbox below and had the padlock off the pump in seconds. I had the massive tank filled in 10 minutes. As I was tanking up, I wondered how it was that I was okay with the insane 180 that had happened in my brain over the past few hours. I had been traveling towards this place as if I'd been there before, yet in the former sane part of my mind, I had no idea in the world where I was. But in this new part, this was on its shit, right up to and including where to get gas without having any guff from the locals. The pump jumped and stopped. I pulled it out and had the boat back in the lane heading for the open part of the Mediterranean in 3 minutes. Just a few more hours now, and I would be off the shore of Greece. Something else I knew without knowing how. I also knew that I would have to get off this boat soon. This thing must be as hot as the sun by now. I had left the police car at the dock, and with the sonic boom sound that comes from this boat when it starts, someone would surely be able to help them put me and this boat together. Plus, this had been part of the escape from the hotel in Istanbul, and the whole shootout, boat explosion, RPG firing must have brought some attention from more than just the few locals that tried to chase us up the steps. I mean, I know this part of the world was more tolerant of that sort of thing, but really, I also had no idea really who was trying to kill Tara or me. Even though my skills had returned, I was in the dark as to who or why this was all happening. And lastly, I had some time to think about her. Tara. Did I just fuck her back there in the safe house? I hoped that she was okay, but then I hoped that she was in a straitjacket in a padded cell. After all, if she had left me alone, I might have been fine. Or would I have been dead, killed in my boxer shorts, trying to buy a pack of American Spirit smokes at a local booze drive-thru? Just another Florida man story on the news, only this one would be about a hack NC-17 writer killed by a former Turkish secret police agent for reasons unknown. The press would have had a field day with that. And what about my family? Kendall and little Kevin. Wow, what about them? I had been so wrapped up in this madness that I had really hardly thought of them since Tara told me that bullshit about them being agents of OMD. Like a 34-year-old man could pass for an 8-year-old boy. In all the mess, I had almost forgotten what day it was. I really had to think, but it seemed like it was Wednesday, and if that was right, I had just 3 days to get home. 3 days before they came home from their trip to Dallas. My wife's family reunion was there. And I would have to be there at the airport to meet them, all normal and shit, like nothing was wrong. What the hell would I tell them? Hopefully nothing. Not one fucking thing about this. Could I be so lucky to have that work out? Who knows? But I was going to give it a shot. The boat moved along at a good speed, and the sun was now just coming up, and in the distance, I could see the coast. Before I could think about it, I knew it was the shore of Mount Athos border wall. I pointed the boat towards the seawall and hoped that there would be no local coast patrol. Once I had the boat moored on a small wooden pier that came off the small stone house, I went ashore. I was not met by anyone, and in a few minutes I had found a small outdoor restaurant next to a parking lot that staged tours to the top of the mountain. I was sitting there on a small bench outside the building when I saw a man from a village point at me, talking to 2 local policemen. It was not hard to understand what had happened. He had seen me come ashore. Now I was going to have to explain this inexplicable mess, or I was going to do my Liam Neeson impression again. Time was compressing in my head as I stood there without a car or a plan of escape. I was thinking for the first time that I wished that Tara was with me, even though she was mad as hell. She would have some insane idea or radical option in her head that would escape a normal mind. A threesome of fishermen and a cop started moving my way just as a 15-passenger van filled with tourists pulled up in the lot and stopped right in front of me. It looked more like an old-fashioned party bus where the driver was blocked off and separated from the rest of the box where the passengers sat. The driver got out and walked right over to me and began a painful, broken attempt at Italian. I said I did not speak Italian. I also mentioned that this was Greece and not Italy, and he laughed. He was asking me in better English about the tour times to the summit, but I was looking at the open door, just sitting there, all comfy, waiting for someone to fill the seat. I stood up as he was rambling about the 14 Ethiopian travelers in the rear of the van and how he could not even ask them a single question in any common language. How the Home Office did not tell him that he would need an interpreter. Then he was saying some other shit about international flights, but I was all the way over to the van and halfway in the seat before the guy even noticed I had moved. He was also not aware that the 2 cops and the old fisherman/narc were on me and closing as well. He was too busy pointing at the mountains and the poor people in the back of his van to even notice that I was 2 seconds from stealing his shit, and then I pulled the door shut and took off. The police were only about 20 feet away, and they met the driver in a jog, screaming, waving hands feverishly that ended with them being left far behind in a cloud of diesel exhaust. I could hear the folks in the back falling around and letting out some foul language that I assumed was cussing. I could not tell if they were speaking Oromo or some other Ethiopian dialect. I also did not know how I knew what the major languages were spoken in fucking Ethiopia at that moment. Perhaps that was more of the lost memories that were starting to come back. Who knew? In a few minutes, I might be able to converse with them, which, by and large, would not be a good thing. How the fuck I was going to be able to explain that I was hijacking their vacation and taking them on a Mr. Toad's wild ride to the far side of the country, only to leave them there while I hopped the next boat or life raft to Italy. Whatever these poor fuckers were hoping to see and do here in the boot of the old world, this was not going to be that. In fact, there might as well have been a sign at the edge of the parking lot as we flew out of there that simply said, "Abandon all hope for your vacation." It had been about an hour since I had stolen the vacation dreams of these people and that old guy's life savings in the form of this tour van and took off west, heading for the other coast of Greece. There had been a form of quiet in the back that was both disconcerting and welcoming, and I had been making good time, and I had lucked out on gas. The tank was full when I played my Grand Theft Auto move back at the mountain wall. But in the last hour, the gauge had moved to half, mainly due to the hills and what I'm sure was the massive weight this tank was carrying. Not just the size, but even 14 thin Ethiopians and a slim 150 pounds each were adding weight and their luggage too. Christ, it had just occurred to me that I might have to get rid of these clingers. I grabbed the driver's cell phone that he was also now without, due to me and my evil move, and checked to see how far I was away from my destination. I was less than 2 hours from the west coast of the island, and if I got there before sunset, I might be able to see Italy. Like Sarah Palin could see Russia from her backyard. At least somebody's backyard, where I would most likely be dumping off this albatross of a van and these poor, simple bastards. Probably covered in their own sweat and piss and feces and being trapped in the back there for hours on end. Hotboxing them back there, confused and helpless to affect any control over their circumstances. Not that dissimilar to how many people from Africa came to the New World, trapped in a small space with no food or water, unable to break free, unable to understand what the fuck was going on, abducted by a white monster. I was that fucking white monster. If I was a human, I would have at least offered them a Coke or a fucking moon pie or something. Did they even have moon pies in Europe? Who knew? I suppose a few more hours would not matter anyhow. It's not like any of them would be overcome with gratitude for the extra 2 hours and testify on my behalf at the trial for human rights violations at the fucking Hague. Well, if he had kept us there another 2 hours, I would have been mad, but he seemed overcome with guilt and sincerely sorry when he forced us out of the van and left us stranded on the side of the road in a strange country as he drove off with all of our luggage and money. Yeah, that wasn't going to happen. In fact, at this point, it could not get much worse if I sold them to human traffickers. And just for the record, I did not. Even though the option was a real one and we were very close to Albania. And we all know about them. I believe that Marco was from there in Taken. Marco from Tropotja. I got back in the van, ignoring the screams for help, and headed west, counting the minutes until the van ran out of gas, or they broke a window and jumped out, or I found the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean. As for how I was getting off the island and over to another country without a passport or legal entry was an issue to be dealt with later. 2 hours later, to be precise. Chapter 7. I have been skirting along the Albanian border for a while now, being very careful not to end up on some street that was a border crossing into that fucking place. I would really need Liam if I ended up there, and again, it did not happen. I was heading south now, and off to the right side of the road I could see the lights of Corfu, and in a few minutes I would have to make up my mind where to stop, unlock the bag, and then hot step it to the shore. It had been 45 minutes since I had heard from the group in the back. It had been oddly quiet again. I was concerned, but not enough to stop now when I was so close. I found a small and what seemed like better road suited for golf carts to make the descent down to the water. Once there, I collected my things, left the keys in the van, opened my door, and got out. The crowd in the back sprang to life, like they had been on pause, or a computer when you walk by it and it's in sleep mode and the slightest movement of the floorboards cause it to light up, making you think you're in a horror movie or some alien film. They were screaming at me. They were definitely speaking Oramo. The loose translation was something like, God will punish me, and I was the son of a motherless ox with HIV. I am, of course, paraphrasing, but it's close. Again, I had no idea how I knew that, but I also did not have the time to think about it. I leaned back in the cab, pushed the unlock button, and ran for my life, screaming over my shoulder, Defame, 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 which either meant sorry in Oramo, or it might have been crippled goat. I only hoped that they understood, and either they knew I was sorry or that I was crazy, and in fact, both were true. My feet were in the water now, and the other thing I had hoped for was that the last 11 hours had taken its toll on them to the point where they would not be able to follow me, because I was limber, but no white man, in the shape I was in, could outrun the slowest of Ethiopians. The panic I felt as I heard them enter the water was like a 5-foot line of coke hitting me. I was swimming faster than I had ever thought possible, as a dozen or so raging mad men and women were in hot pursuit, screaming at me as their thin arms slapped in the dark water of the Mediterranean. I could barely see them. I could, however, tell they were there by the splashing sound, like a form of latent human sonar. What I did have in my favor was that I was buoyant, and they had no body fat whatsoever. So if they stopped swimming or ran out of rage, they would sink like a bag of rocks. I could easily just float across the channel to Corfu and then rest for a while. I was halfway into the channel when I risked a look back. I could see no one and hear nothing. I started to think that maybe they had drowned. Their bodies would be washing up on a shore a few days south of here in some tourist hotel private beach, hot, horny English housewives baking in the sun, having their dreams about Daniel Craig swaggering out of the blue water in a Speedo shattered as a thin, frail black bodies littering the breakwater. A simple my bad would not cover this kind of shit. I pushed such thoughts from my head as I made my way towards the lights of Carissa Beach, and in a few more minutes I was laying flat out in the dark just a few feet from the shore, half dead and in need of a good many things: water, food, and a ride to the other side of this island. It was not a walk that I wanted to do now or in the morning. I needed to get over to the west shore and off this rock before dawn, just in case one or two of the mad Ethiopians made it to shore, dead or alive. I made my way to the main road and then started walking west. My stolen phone told me that I was 39 kilometers from the closest west side beach, a tourist area that would be the best shot of stealing a small boat to make the crossing in the Mediterranean, and then Italy. My phone also told me that it would take 7 hours to walk, making it very clear that if I wanted to get off this island before dawn, I would need a ride. I had been walking for over 2 hours when I came upon a small area that was like a town. The homes were closer to each other, and there was a general store and a closed restaurant on a dim-lit street. The side of the store building, there was a small delivery vehicle, like a motorcycle with a box on the back, the kind of two-stroke stuff you see in all these small, out-of-the-way towns in these countries. I risked a quick stop to see if there was any way I could get it started, and to my surprise, the keys were in the compartment under the seat. I guess since it was an island, most people thought, where would you go? Where would I go? About 30 more clicks to my escape beach, and now I would be there in less than an hour, leaving at least 4 hours of darkness to make my way far out into the water. My target was Castro, on the Lecce province of Italy. It was a small coast town that, if my calculations were right, was only 120 kilometers from the beach that I was heading to. A cheap motorboat with a few extra cans of gas would get me there. Even if I had to swim a little or broke down in the water off the shores of Italy, I would be okay. I would turn myself into the Italian authorities and feel reasonably safe as a U.S. citizen. The little van chugged along in the dark, winding one-lane roads, and a little before 3 a.m. I could see the lights at the shore of the beach. A single light, but still. I ditched the van and made my way onto the sand. Over to the left, I could see a rental hut with a good selection of small sailboats, sailboards, and moored in the water's edge were 2 motorboats. I assumed that they were used to rescue renters from the water if they had enough or could not sail back in. One even had 3 cans of gas in it and a simple pull cord start. I was in the water and heading northwest in 10 minutes. It was dark as hell, but the moon did give enough light and I could see a few lights from the boats off the shore. I guessed that by the time I was deep in the sea, the sun would be up, and I might even be able to see a few features of Italy by dead reckoning, a term and an act that I had no idea how I knew about. I just knew I could do it. As the boat made its way across the calm night waters, I had a little time to think about the last 72 hours. I had just wanted a pack of fucking cigarettes, that's all. And for that, I was now in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, in the second stolen boat, with a list of crimes behind me in at least 3 countries that was impressive and would keep me here on the other side of the Atlantic for the rest of my life if I was caught. I wondered if there could be someone in Interpol that might be sharp enough to connect the dots from the plane crash in Turkey to the hotel RPG to the assault on the police officers at the mental hospital to the stolen gas and then the abandoned luxury speedboat off the coast of Greece to the stolen van and the abduction of tourists and then this delivery van and now this motorboat. Was there anyone operating anywhere in the world that would have been able to see these events and say, yep, this is the work of one man? I hope not. Elsewise, I was in for some hard time being dragged from country to country, chained and shackled, wearing an iron mask, set up in a dungeon, and left hanging from the stone wall like Edmond Dantes, plotting my return and revenge as the Count of Monte Cristo, forced to sew myself into a dead man's robe, and then wait to be thrown off the wall into the sea, this very sea I was in now. As dark gave way to dawn, my thoughts turned again to Tara. I wondered where she was. I was also thinking about the dream of her and I in that Fiji screensaver. Was it just a dream? Or was it a memory? I had seen myself in the video telling me that I was not who I thought I was. And that doesn't sound crazy at all. And not in some existential way, but I really did not know who I really was. There was a big difference between being a hack writer and an international spy. One does stuff and the other one writes about stuff. But was any of this really real? Could there be another explanation for all of this? Was I, just like they told Arnold in Total Recall, in a room somewhere, suffering from a psychotic break? Licking the walls and fumbling around in a straitjacket, unable to scratch my balls? It simply could not be ruled out. Nothing could, including the possibility that all of it was true. Every mad and unbelievable part of the story, even my 8-year-old stepson being a real 30-something midget double agent imposter. What was true? I thought I would know soon enough. If I was lucky, I could make my own way to the U.S. Embassy, and they would have me home in time for the pickup at the airport. Then I would cut that kid in half and count the rings, if I had to get to the truth. I could see in the distance the coast of Italy now. I was almost home. Chapter 8. It's hard, like most things these past few days, to explain in detail what was happening. I was, by my guess, about 2 miles off the coast of Pasta World when I heard the screams and the roar of the motor behind me. It was the Ethiopians, in a long speedboat, closing fast. Clearly, I had been right to worry about them. They must have halted their swim pursuit of me and taken to this boat, which was a much better idea all around. I had no idea where they got it, but I wish I had found it. I would have been ashore hours ago and most likely have been processed now and waiting at the airport to get my comped flight paid for by the U.S. Embassy. I could do nothing but watch as they got closer and closer, because I was in a toy boat compared to the Miami Vice-style Coke Runners boat that those little fuckers had stolen. It was like Mike Tyson in his prime versus that girl from the old TV show Blossom. He would have killed her with his breath. Then my concentration was broken by a voice amplified through a megaphone. I turned my head back towards the coast to see 3 boats coming towards me filled with what I assumed was a form of Italy's Coast Guard, or Immigration Patrol. Either way, just another way, I was fucked. It had been a good ride, and let's face it, the odds of me even getting this far were like a Google to 1, so all in, I wasn't even that pissed off. I knew a few things all at once. The first was the simplest. I was never going to make that airport pickup, because I was never going to see my home again. The Ethiopians started firing at me with what looked like handguns. The troops on the Italian boats returned fire with automatic weapons that could have been AK-47s. I was in the center of the crossfire. It was a second later that the wind changed from the light offshore breeze to a hurricane-like downdraft. The water was rippling out in all directions from my dinghy, like a huge rock had just been dropped in it. And there was a loud beeping sound ringing in my ears as I looked up into the wind to see the bottom of a rescue helicopter hovering over me. A rope with a harness came floating down towards me, and then I saw her head pop out of the side of the chopper, waving at me. She was dressed in a red jumpsuit and her hair was perfect as it whipped around in the chopper wind. Gunfire hit all around me. The boat was being taken apart bit by bit with each bullet. How they kept missing me was almost as impossible as the rest of this story. I took a second to wonder 2 things at once. Where the hell had she been? And the other one was, how did she find me? In fact, how did any of them find me? I had just been a guy in a small motorboat out on the Mediterranean for a little cruise. For all anyone could have known, should have known, I was just a guy. Any guy. Not some guy that demanded this kind of response from the Italian government, for sure. And as for my revenge-driven former hostages, how did they find me? And how did they get so heavily armed in a couple of countries with big gun control laws was a whole other issue I would have to think about later. Right now, I was deep in the shit, and the beeping sound was louder than before, piercing my ears, making me dizzy and half sick. I had no idea where it was coming from or how to make it stop. It was like a form of a concert stadium amplified tinnitus. For a second, I could not even understand where I was. What happened next was pure instinct. The next thing I knew, I was being pulled up in the air at a great speed, higher and higher as the boat gunmen all trained their fire upwards in vain, bullets shooting past my face, heading into the thin air. The air got colder around me, and then I chanced to look up, and the chopper disappeared into the clouds. And then I felt the rope pulling me up towards the open door, past what looked like 4 large yellow barrels attached to the bottom of the helicopter body. The beeping sound was louder now, and it seemed to be shutting out all other sounds that must have been going on all around me in this insane moment. I felt Tara's hands grab me, pulling me into the deck, and then she was on top of me. The chopper heeled upward, off to the right. I could feel her hands beating on my chest in panic, screaming at me. "Stay with me, Duke," she screamed. "Stay with me here," she said in my ear as the warmth came over me and I was passing out. My last thought was, had I been shot? Tara seemed to know what I was thinking and what to do about it. She wanted no part of that. She spun around and grabbed a small steel box from the floor of the cabin and pulled from it a small vial. She ripped the cap off of it and took a pill out and broke it apart and slammed it underneath my nose. The smell filled my head in a way I thought was not possible, and I literally sprung up from the floor with my heart racing at 300 beats per minute. "Fucking A, Duke, you're up now and running," she screamed, laughing and hugging me. I thought I was going to lose you there," she finished, starting to run her hands all over me. "Are you hit?" she said frantically as she did her body search on me. I thought perhaps I was hit, but I could not be sure. It did not feel like I was shot, but then again, how the fuck would I know what that felt like? "You're clean," she said at last, satisfied that I was not bleeding out of any new hole. I was happy to hear that, and in fact, I was happy to hear anything. The beeping sound had stopped, and now, as the aircraft came out of the clouds, I could see the top of the buildings of Venice. This was the first time I had a minute to look around this helicopter, and it was beautiful inside. All red leather and velour. It looked like it cost $100 million. The helicopter you might see the president of a country riding in, and that was when I noticed the crest on the seats. It was the coat of arms of the Holy See and Vatican City, in the form of the two keys crossed and a tiara. I was in a helicopter from the Vatican, and unless I was completely mistaken, it was the Pope's fucking helicopter. Is this, was all I could get out. Tara knew what I was trying to ask. "Yes, I stole the Pope's ride from the Holy Helipad. Bobby was with me here. He's got about 100 hours in the sim, so we just winged it." "Winged it? Winged it? What the fuck? How? She smiled at me, coming close to me and pulling my face to her face, and then she kissed me. Like a lover. Soft and slow and all too familiar. Like we had done it many times before. She smelled like Dior and crazy. Her lips and her tongue tasted like sweet bliss with a hint of espresso. I could not tell if it was from her lip gloss or that she had just had a coffee someplace before she stole the Holy Father's helicopter from the most heavily guarded city in the world and saved me from certain death or a life of incarceration. I knew it was wrong, but let's face it. If anyone deserved a thank you kiss, it was this insane, intoxicating woman. This fearless, skilled femme fatale that had extracted me from my life of mundane writer's block while sitting in a stew of my own filth. I pushed back at her, forcing our lips harder together. She wrapped her arms around my neck as I grabbed her hips and pulled her body flat against mine. I was suddenly filled with new life and at the same time completely regretting that I did not get in that tub with her back at that perfect hotel. The moment seemed to last forever. And as I closed my eyes for a second, I saw that dream, her and I in the sun. And then we were falling. "Hey!" the man called Bobby yelled at us. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but he may not be hit, but the engine was." I did not want to let go of her. I did not want to open my eyes. "Shit," I heard her say in a soft voice in my ear, and when I did open my eyes, I wish I could have closed them again. We were heading right for the city, smoke billowing out of everywhere on the top of the chopper, from the sides, and even under the dashboard in front of the captain's seat. And a different but equally disturbing beeping sound was coming from the front, along with a warning system voice, known to aviators as Bitch and Betty, repeating over and over, "Pull up, pull up, pull up," as if we could do that, but we were just enjoying her voice too much, hypnotized and captivated by her turn of phrase. Even in the throes of certain doom, one could not help but call her a dumb cunt. "Oh, pull up? Well, I didn't think of that. 'Cause the buildings are not up there," I said aloud to no one. "Yeah, no shit, right?" Bobby managed to say as he was pulling on that stick like he hated it and wanted it to come off the floor mount. We were coming in fast from the sea and heading right for a large church-looking thing with a huge courtyard behind it. "Bobby!" Tara yelled. "Head for the Piazza San Marco and cut the engines and try to counter-rotate the blades to help us break our fall." A second later, we were flying past a tall spire and over a courtyard, which was filled with some people with protest signs of some kind, causing a parting of the crowded sea like we were buzzing sheep in a crop-dusting plane. Just before we hit, Tara yelled to Bobby to deploy the crash countermeasures that were like an airbag, but it was attached to the bottom of the chopper. They came out of those barrels I had seen when I was hanging from the line over the Mediterranean. We hit hard, but the airbags surely saved our lives. Tara and I jumped out of the open door. Bobby found his way out from the front, and we headed into the crowd as quickly as we could due to the massive amount of people screaming and heading towards us, along with a few hundred local cops and maybe even a few others. For a few hundred feet of the run, I was confused by the huge response, but then I remembered we had stolen and now crashed the Pop's Whirlybird and on top of a union protest in the main piazza of Venice. And while we had not crushed anyone, as far as I could tell, they were not too happy with the assholes that had taken the Holy Father's shit. We were on foot now, booking it down the small streets and alleys that led from San Marco Square, with a legion of crazies, fools, semi-socialists, members of law enforcement from multiple departments, and devout followers of the Holy Father, all bent on drawing and quartering us like they did back in the Inquisition, purifying us by fire, and then dropping our ashes into the still waters of the canal. "Where are we going?" I yelled at Tara. She turned her head slightly back towards me and smiled. "The nearest hotel, to finish what we started in the helicopter." I couldn't fight it or her anymore. I was here now, in the moment with her, lost in it, alive in a way that I could have never imagined. There was also no doubt that she was the coolest girl I had ever met, and if this is how I was going to go out on the run with her, then I was fine with that. Did I hope we would make it out of this and get to that hotel? Yeah, but if we did not, I knew at once, on those brick-covered streets, dragging a screaming crowd of hundreds behind us, that this had all been worth it.